There's a layer of caregiving we don't always name. The cultural layer, the unspoken rules you inherit about what love should look like, who carries responsibility, and what you're supposed to do when family needs you. And when those expectations collide with Western medicine and disability service systems, caregivers can end up holding it all: advocacy, paperwork, grief, identity, and family pressure, all at the same time. Today, I'm sitting down with Agazit Negash, author of Joyful Resilience. By the end of this conversation, you'll have grounded, practical ways to honor your roots while still advocating clearly, protecting dignity, and not burning yourself out in the process. Just a gentle note before we begin. Today's conversation includes grief, cultural expectations, and caregiving responsibilities. Please listen in a way that feels supportive for you. You're welcome to pause and come back at any time. If you're tired of holding it together in hard rooms, appointments, hospital days, and service systems, and then crashing afterwards, you're in the right place. Hi, lovely. Caregiver to caregiver, I'm really glad you're here. I'm Michelle. As a caregiver and advocate, I know firsthand what it's like to become the walking medical encyclopedia, to fight for continuity so you don't have to repeat your story, and to leave the room thinking, I should have said that differently. No pressure, no perfect routines, and no toxic positivity. Just one gentle reset and one practical next step so you can have calmer days, clearer words, and advocate without self-abandoning. Let's take a breath and start. You're navigating a lot, so I'll keep this simple. If your nervous system goes into survival mode in hard rooms, you can explore my 90-second reset program, a self-paced online program with short videos, guided audios, and simple downloadable tools, designed to be easy to use in real life, not another big to-do. It's there to help you settle your body, organize your thoughts, and find your words again, before, during, and after appointments. The link is in the show notes. No pressure, just there if it supports you. Today's guest understands this. Two worlds at once. Experience intimately. Agazit Negash is the author of Joyful Resilience, and after losing both parents within weeks of each other, she became the primary caregiver and legal guardian for her autistic brother Biruk. In our first conversation, we held the suddenness of this shift. In today's follow-up, we're talking about bridging the gap, cultural, caregiving, and the systems that can either support a life or make everything harder. This episode is for the caregiver who is trying to honor their roots while also choosing what actually helps their loved ones thrive, even when others don't understand. Agazit, welcome back.
Hi, thank you for having me.
I want to start our conversation today, Agazit, when everything changed. What did being the eldest mean in your family and your culture? And what expectations did you feel land on you straight away?
Yeah, sure. So I'm actually not the eldest. I am the middle child, but I am the only girl, and I'm only a year older than Biruk. So I think those two things played a pretty significant role in me being, by default, the second anchor in the family. So when I was younger, it was my parents that were the primary anchor, and there was no expectation from them for me to take care of Biruk, especially because I was so young. But when they passed away, I think there was this assumption, my own assumption from a young age, where I realized that I was going to be the one responsible for him. Every sibling and child is wired differently. I have an older sibling. For some reason, I was the one that was a bit more wired to be more responsible. And so I relished in that, for better or for worse. And I took that actually be a huge part of my identity as I got older. And I think hindsight's 20/20. But what I learned was during this time when my parents passed away and I took on that responsibility for my brother, my identity was very much meshed with being a caregiver. And still today, I'm still learning how to untangle that. So I was being his advocate, his emotional support system, and I put my grief secondary and I had to piecemeal it. And I mentioned that a little bit in the book where I had to piecemeal my grief because he was the sole mission at that point. He was the reason for me persevering and getting through. But by default, I put myself second. And I think looking back, I wish I had somebody with me to kind of check up on me and say, hey, how are things going? And maybe I was overly independent, overly responsible. But I think if I could go back, I would be a bit more vocal, a bit more honest with myself and have people in my life. And there were people in my life, but I just chose to keep it to myself and to kind of be in survival mode in the way that I thought was best. But what I should have done was I should have had individuals where I should have been talking to, who I could have been reaching out to, who I could have been saying, hey, I need your help. And I just didn't. And it was simply because of a framework that I had internalized and adopted from a very young age. And I don't know if that's just my part of my personality, but I think that's part of what ultimately had happened. And I think when I needed people there when I was older during this time, I should have been reaching out and I just didn't. And I think that it's very easy to fall into that role, especially if you're a middle child or an older sibling. You seem to take on that responsibility and put yourself second. But I think looking back, I wish I had just been a little bit more honest with myself. And I think that would have helped me with the grieving process and doing it in a way that would have been supportive for me and for my brother.
And what did you feel you had to do right in those moments, like the expectation that either you had picked up along the way or you were explicitly told? Like, what was it that you felt, I have to get this right?
Yeah, that's a great question. I felt like I had to make sure he had stability. I had to make sure he knew where he was going to stay. I had to make sure that he felt safe. And so his safety and his feeling of everything is going to be okay, that was really important to me because he was closer within proximity and he was around my parents probably longer than any of us were. He lived with them literally until they had passed away. And so I needed to ease his transition to feeling safe and in a safe environment to grieve his own loss. And I didn't know what grief was going to feel like for him. We all grieve differently. And for him, I wasn't quite sure how that would look, especially being on the spectrum and all these other complications of moving away from his home and then living with me. So my immediate pressure was to make him feel safe and loved. And that meant more to me than anything else. And I just wanted to make sure he could wake up in the morning and still ask me questions, could still process his own thoughts, could sit on the couch and just watch TV and eat whatever he wanted. I wanted him to feel safe and in a restful place so he could process his own emotions. And that was a priority to me.
I think that was really important from our first conversation as well, is that he was stable, that Biruk had the opportunity to feel just as secure when he was living with his parents as he would being in your supportive space. And I know that transition was really sudden. There was no conversations prior to understand where that role would take you if these situations occurred, because it wasn't something that was on the radar of occurring. What did you feel you weren't allowed to say out loud?
Honestly, during that time, how I was grieving, that was something that I didn't want to discuss. A lot of my own frustrations and anger with the situation. My father's passing, we knew was coming at some point. My mother's was not. And there was a lot of anger from what I experienced during that time was anger and just feeling like the story wasn't supposed to end this way. And so I wasn't allowed to say that out loud. I wasn't allowed to be angry in public settings. I just kind of just allowed people to grieve with me. And I'm sure they didn't want to push or impress or push their own perspective on my journey. But I was actually very angry about how I lost my mother because that was more sudden than I could have ever expected. I felt a little abandoned because I lost both of them within weeks of each other. I felt like, did she give up on me? What happened? She was fine. And so everything was okay. And I thought that what I had envisioned for my parents passing and me being there, that wasn't the story. That was not how the ending of their life was written. And I always envisioned myself being at their deathbed. I always envisioned myself being there with them. And that wasn't the story. And that wasn't how it was written. I think I was not happy with the ending of their life because I wasn't part of that narrative as closely as I would have liked to be. And that wasn't something that I could have said out loud because I didn't want it to be perceived as selfish. And so it's a selfish thing to think that, to be there with them. But that's the reality of it, was I wanted to be there. But was that for me or was that for them? And then I look back, and even at the end of the book, I mentioned this, that they passed away 25 days apart. And my dad, he was joking with my mother, and he said to her, "Where do you think you're going? You're coming with me." And she laughed it off because we knew he was soon to pass. And he passed away on Valentine's Day. And then she passed away 25 days later. And so I really believe that my mother passed away just from having a broken heart. And I think that the emotional stress of that and just losing her beloved in such a sudden way impacted her too. And that was how their love story and their life was written. And I had to honor that and respect that. But it took me some time to get there because initially I was like, this isn't fair. I should have been there. I should have been the one because I have that responsible sibling, gonna do everything, gotta be there for everyone perspective. And I didn't get that. I didn't get that story. And I felt robbed. But when I look back, I was like, it was meant to be written that way. And I think there's nothing that I could change about it. But I also realized I had to make peace with it too.
And I think when we are looking at modern society and the way they portray the passing of a loved one where we're sitting beside them, we get like the weeks before they pass away with them and everyone stops working and all of these lovely moments. That isn't the reality for a lot of people because it can happen suddenly, unexpectedly. And those fairy tale endings that we get demonstrated on the screen are not there. And because grief, passing, death isn't spoken about freely in society either, it's not something that we're educated on, it is really difficult to find that space of understanding when we have a preconceived or an idea of what we would love to happen. And I'd be really interested to find out, like, what parts of your culture felt supportive in this journey and what parts felt like really heavy for you?
That's a great question. I think the support piece was this sense of loyalty in my parents' culture. There's this loyalty to one another, taking care of everyone. Everybody knows everybody and everybody is there to support in some capacity. And that kind of helped. That was pretty much ingrained in me since I was young. And so when my parents passed away, the alternative for me not taking care of Biruk would have been the state or would have been another individual. And I just couldn't fathom that. So I absolutely made that decision. And I think from a cultural belief and a foundation that I have to immediately be the one to take care of him. And so that sense of loyalty kind of catapulted me to push through some of my own sense of loss and grief to make sure that I was supportive for him because I had to make sure that he was safe and he was taken care of and that he had what he needed. And that piece of loyalty within my culture is something that still resonates with me today. And I think that resonates with a lot of other cultures too, is just this taking care of a loved one, especially the senior citizen or the youth or the young or even somebody who's disabled. And I think the piece that where I felt pressured, which this was pretty interesting, it was kind of a curveball I wasn't expecting, was this pressure to include everybody in my immediate family and certain people in my extended family to be a part of the decision making and support for Biruk. And that just wasn't the case. And I mentioned this in the book where I thought the people that were going to be supporting me, and even though they meant well, I realized that they just didn't have the capacity to support me, even though they meant well. And then there were some people that I thought were going to be a part of his process who were there when my parents were alive, that suddenly were not a part of the process. And that kind of shocked my system a little bit. And I realized, well, I have to reorient my sense of tribe. And so I had looked at my sense of community and my network, and I had to sort of restructure that. So I had certain friends I realized I could rely on, certain family members that I thought who were actually more distant in relation to me, who were all hands on deck, who were supportive in the way that I needed. I was pleasantly surprised by that. I was not expecting that at all. I was like, how is it that this extended family member wants to help, but this family member who I thought was going to be there was not there? So I had to let that go and allow that the tribe to become what it needed to be. And then it came from the community, from local resources, from organizations and people that were willing to support me. Here, where he's staying, I had to reach out to friends who were really supportive, who just loved Biruk. And in the book, I mentioned how Biruk met a lot of my friends, and even in the neighborhood, he became kind of a little famous, where people were like, how's Biruk doing? How's your brother doing? And I'm like, geez, nobody paid that much attention to me, but okay. It was like, okay. And I kind of leveraged that. They were like, how's your brother? When he's in town, please come and visit us. And just even like at the UPS store or at the local grocery store, people who really enjoyed his company and who he was. And so I had to reorient all of that. And so that pressure of including family members, where I was like, I don't think this resonates with me. And ultimately, it came down to, what do I feel like I deserve as a caregiver? And what do I feel like Biruk deserves in his life to make sure that he has a healthy life? And that meant plucking some people out and putting some people in. And it's a harsh thing to say, but it is the truth when you're creating a network where you're thinking about the well-being of your loved one.
And I think you're right, where you talk about the expectation or the people that you think are going to be hands, feet, whole body involved. And then there's the left field. No, they're not. So the adjustment is definitely a wake-up call, because it's not only like an emotional adjustment, but it's a mental adjustment to be able to understand why, whether it's something to do with me as the caregiver, is it something to do with the fact that they were only there for my parents? Like, what is the missing link? And sometimes we will never know.
Yeah, well, sometimes we'll never know. In some instances, it was the realization of what that reality would look like for Biruk when it came to taking care of him. Like, hey, can you actually pick him up from here? Can you visit him at the home? Can you take him to this certain thing? And some people were not willing to do that. And it's like, I think it's pretty simple, but it wasn't for them. And for some people, it really was just a closeness to the parents. And I don't know what that relationship with my parents looked like. It's a bit of a mystery to me, but it definitely did shift. And I had to make peace with it. It did feel like I was being a little abandoned by some people. And it hurts. It does hurt. And I think as caregivers, it's important to acknowledge that. And it's important to recognize that when you don't get the support that you were expecting to have, it is part of the reality of caregiving. And I think when that happens, it's a painful part, but I think it's one that I needed to be familiar with just so I could have a better understanding of how to take care of Biruk and how to take care of me and how to set expectation from when I do receive support from individuals. It was a very eye-opening experience, I'll say.
Yes, it's definitely something that is not part of the field handbook when you become a caregiver. And in your experience, what are some of the invisible scripts families inherit around caregiving, especially in immigrant families?
That the individual, I can't speak for all immigrant families and I can't speak for all cultures, but I can speak for mine. And I feel that the inherent understanding is that you take care of that individual and they stay at home. I think that my mom, if she was still alive today, she would have never had him go to an adult care facility or an adult home. I think there's a stigma around that. Like, no, you don't do that. You take care of your loved one. They stay at home. I think it's honestly from just a lack of exposure and knowledge. And I think there's a lot of room for growth and study and support that could be further developed. But a lot of it that I felt like that was very inherited. And a part of the process was to keep my brother at home, to keep him in the house and to keep it, the family takes care of the individual. But the thing with that is, even though we would like to believe that we are the best caregiver because you're related to your loved one in some capacity, whether you're a sibling or a parent, you would like to believe that you are that person that knows them best. But in some instances, that's not the case. And that was my case as well. I think that was my parents' case as well, but I don't think they got that far in their journey with Biruk. I didn't realize it until I had him under my care, that I didn't have the whole picture, all the dynamics to make sure that he had the light that he deserved. And I think I was selling him short in his ability to take care of himself in some instances. And I think we want to smother and protect and care and love our loved one. And I think because that by default, you can shelter them and you can limit their experiences in this beautiful life. And sometimes they deserve that. They deserve to have those experiences. They deserve to experience failure and joy and happiness and conquering a fear. And so when you shelter that individual and keep them at home, they don't have those experiences. And they're always going to be wondering because they're watching TV or they're reading books. And I think that causing limitations in his life that could have been addressed so much more sooner. But I think my parents' culture, and I think it's safe to say that there are a lot of cultures like this, that they would prefer to keep the loved one at home and to support them at home. And then they get wrapped up in a routine of being at home, being around their culture. And the culture is beautiful. My brother he loves my parents' culture. But at the same time, by default, he kind of just settled in. He didn't realize that he could get a job or he could do these things. They saw his potential, but they were afraid of what that looked like to put him out there, because they're always thinking worst case scenario, because they don't always trust in the institutions and the organizations that are out there supporting members of the autism community.
I think also it's that fear of what happens if they have a negative experience in the community, if they come up against bullying that they're not aware of, if they come up against situations where a parent would normally step in to protect and love and care. And when those scripts kind of collide with disability support needs, where does the pressure usually go? Is it on the carer or is it on the person that you're caring for, or for the people who need to come in and make changes?
I would think it's the carer, the individual who is that person. But at the same time, and I think that's where kind of the confusion may lie and misunderstandings could lie, is that you have the caregivers, you have the individuals being cared for, and you have these organizations that are supporting your loved one. And they have a lot to offer and a lot to provide as far as experience. And some of this experience is substantiated and verified through science or evidence or factual things. And I think that when you short circuit that experience from a place of fear, you almost take on that responsibility. You prefer to just not even work with these institutions or organizations, because there's such an emotional burden for a family member or a caregiver when they're putting their loved one out there to have these experiences. And that, as you mentioned, that fear too. And I think sometimes we fear that as caregivers that these organizations and institutions don't take into full account the emotional and the cultural weight behind some of the decisions that they're making. And they're not going to know that unless you have those conversations with them. They're not going to know that unless you are being fully transparent with each other. And that is something that, and honestly, when I say transparent, being very honest about perspectives that maybe members of the institutions that work with these families as well as the families have. I think some families think they're not going to know anything about my son or my daughter or my loved one. They're going to put them in harm's way. I don't trust them. They don't know them like I know them. And then organizations are like, why is that individual from that background acting that way? Why are they so protective? And they think, oh, they just don't even want to be a part of the process. When in reality, it's coming from a huge place of fear, because you got to think these first-generation immigrant families, or any family that comes from a different culture, they've had to transplant. If you are working in the Western world, they've had to transplant, probably leave, like my family did, a very difficult background, and they're already dealing with their own personal traumas, right? And then they have a loved one who has a unique circumstance and it has a disability of some sort, and then they have to trust another institution that they're still trying to adapt to and familiarize themselves with. So there's all these layers. So it's just easier to be like, no, I don't even want to deal with this. Let me just handle it myself, and let me just take care of my loved one, not get them involved in the process at all. But I think through careful conversation, I think that with real transparency and honesty, you can get to some of those misunderstandings and really help your loved one prosper and grow in a way that would be beneficial. I think those points of friction and challenge could actually be opportunities to experiment and to find creative ways to really support your loved one. It's not impossible. You just have to be flexible. And I think that goes for any kind of support that you provide your loved one who is on the spectrum or has a disability. That really helped our family. And I think that's something to keep in mind, is just that flexibility and knowing to have those honest conversations, and then finding an interpreter. Finding somebody who is culturally sensitive, finding somebody who, even if they don't speak the language, they might be close in relation to your culture, and they can explain these things to the members of the institutions that are trying to serve. Because they mean well. Everybody does. And I think having that mindset of everybody's doing this for the sake of your loved one is very important. And it just allows for conversations to be had that need to be had. I wish that my parents were a little bit more open to placing Biruk in a unique situation where he could have a caregiver support him. And I think that would have helped a lot. But I think there was just such a fear of having somebody else take care of him who didn't really know who he was. And it's a lot of selfishness, but it is a lot of just fear that hasn't been entirely processed, I think, in some cultures. And when it's not processed and there aren't people to help with that process, it causes almost like an unnecessary dead end.
It's like there's a bridge missing between, and especially if there is a language barrier as well, where words can be misinterpreted or not understood when we're conversing with medical professionals. Because let's be honest, even those of us who do everyday interactions with English, sometimes medical professionals come in and you're like, I don't know what you just said. You used a whole heap of words that medical based, and I need you to take it down so that I can understand what you're saying. And I feel like there are caregivers who are listening at the moment who are caught between tradition and the reality of working with modern medical providers. How did you decide what to honour and what to adapt to allow this new experience in life where he developed more independence and confidence in being able to get a job, to live in a home? How did you make that decision when tradition and reality kind of met?
So I think it goes back to that point of being flexible, and that really helped. Honestly, you mentioned being a bridge, and sometimes you have to bridge those silos when it comes to education, vocational support, finding a caregiver, adult home, the medical service, all of that. It can be very fragmented at times, and I think and compartmented in its own way. And so I think to honor his culture, and because I feel like he was with my parents the longest, he has a lot of Eritrean culture really ingrained in him, I think more than I do. And so because he was with my parents the longest, he lived with them practically his whole life. And so he does ask me on occasion, like, hey, can you take me to that one restaurant? And I want to see that I want to see that video, or whatever the case may be. So the way that I had done it, it was a shock for him to transition into an adult home. But he actually chose the adult home, and he chose it himself. He has his own desires and wants and needs, and he has free will. And it was so beautiful because he picked his adult home. He said, I want to live here. We had like 5, we narrowed it down from 200 to 5 that were really specific to what we felt were his needs. So we visited every single one of them, and he picked it. We included him in that process. I think it's important to include your loved one in that process. And he told the caregivers, you're my caregiver. I'm living here. This is my room. And they laughed, but it was beautiful. And I was like, okay. So it worked out because he's discerning. He knows what's good for himself. And he picked that home for him. And in some other cases with families, that might not be the case. And you have to kind of make that weighted decision based on your culture and based on what you feel is best for your family. Finding maybe an adult home where the caregivers are from your culture or background helps. In Biruk's case, we were able to find an adult home that he wanted a strong male presence, and he also wanted to have caregivers. The caregivers are pretty diverse in the home that he's in from all over the world. He loved that. He's like, oh, I can ask questions about where they're from and their food and their background. He just loves to learn. So that was really great for him. But at the same time, when he moved in, we also made sure that he had music that he listened to from my parents' culture. We also made sure that he has like a Walkman with music. Also, I'll order him food from our culture because I can't cook, and I'm on the other side of the country. So I can't cook that kind of food. I can't cook my parents' traditional food. And so I'll order from a local restaurant that's in the area and I'll send it to him. I'll send him things that are culturally reminiscent and give him that experience. He does ask a lot about visiting family members and people around. So we go and see family members and individuals. So it reminds him of home. It reminds him of what it feels like to be a part of his culture still. And in other cases, my case is different because my parents are no longer alive. But there are cases where your loved one, you are the parent and you're the loved one, you have your loved one in a certain caregiving facility and you want to include your culture. You can be deliberate about that. You can include that in their culture. You can include that in their day-to-day lifestyle wherever they're staying. Additionally, you can also incorporate it when it comes to education and finding vocational support. So some of Brooke's job coaches are of Eritrean descent. Some of them, they're speaking to him and he loves that. And so there just happens to be that job coaches that we were working with were like, hey, we have this one coach who's from your family's background. Do you think that would be great? I was like, if you have that available, great. That's awesome. And they recognize that themselves, that this was important to him. And so that's how they were able to incorporate it educationally. Of course, we talk and I speak to him what I remember from my parents' language. And so he understands it and he'll listen. And so we have that maintained as well. And so again, we have family members who visit him who are also really ingrained in the culture and can support him in that capacity as well. So there's definitely ways. It's not as in-depth as it used to be when my parents were alive, but I'm still able to maintain that with him in a way that is important to him. I wish it was a little bit more. It's just, I'm not my parents, so I can't really give him that. And that's okay that I don't have that ability, but he does get that exposure. And that's really important. I think even in the medical field, we also find doctors who are from our background who can support and help. And I call them myself. I have friends that are in the medical field that are still back in Seattle, Washington. And I'll be like, hey, my brother's dealing with X, Y, and Z. What do you think? And they'll help. And they understand the cultural sensitivities from around the questions that I'm asking and some of the concerns I would have. And so finding people that are from your background who are in these different organizations and institutions is really helpful. And also finding ways to incorporate your culture in that day-to-day for your loved one, if that's something that's important to them, because it might not be. For Biruk, it was, but for other people, it might not be.
And so what I'm hearing a lot is that when culture meets Western medical practices, it's about creating micro layers of integration where it is not affecting your loved one medically. It doesn't affect the treatment plans, but it still makes them connected and grounded and safe in their knowledge and capacity of their culture and their journey. And the other thing that I'm hearing is that if I do this the expected way, where he lives with me, where he is a part of my home, that he wouldn't have the ability to thrive in the way that he has since you took the direction to give him those new life experiences, and that would have a massive impact on the way you survived mentally, emotionally, physically, because it would be a completely different game that you would have to adapt if he was still with you. And you talk so much about how he is thriving with this change, how he is having new life experiences, being able to work, having interactions, and being able to find people who understand your culture is such a massive journey. And in Western medicine spaces, what felt most misaligned with your family culture, if you hadn't have spoken up to give pace, communication styles, to prevent any assumptions being made, what's seen as, I guess the word I'd use is compliance with Western medical practices? What did you feel was most misaligned?
I think I'll use an instance with my brother and his medication. I think there was this assumption, well, most people on the spectrum take this type of medication at this time. And Biruk, because he was in such a loving environment prior, and he still is in a loving environment, but prior to my parents passing away, he had a lot of liberty, a lot of freedom. And his medication was used in a very liberal manner. And I say that because my parents wanted to keep him in his most authentic self, lots of energy and able to cook for himself and all these things. And it got to a point where it was a little out of hand, where they weren't able to manage some of his outbursts. And I talk a little bit about his outbursts in the book when he was younger and when he was older. And I think there was just this assumption where doctors said this is what he needs, these are the kind of medications he needs, and this is what he has to basically take every day to calm him down. And I think when that happened, my parents did what the doctor said to do because they're doctors, but I think there was a lot of fear behind that because it was the first time they were putting him on medication and they weren't sure what was going to happen. They weren't sure how he was going to respond to it. And there was a lot of fear of, will my son change? Is he going to be the same? Like, I know him being this way. Yeah, he's a little rowdy and sometimes he has outbursts, but I want Buruk to be Buruk. And I know when they put him on the medication, he just wasn't completely himself. I mentioned this a little bit in my book. And even when I had him, we put him on the medication again and he was just so drowsy and he was just so calm. And I was like, this is not him. And that was a point where we had to kind of step outside our comfort zone and say, hey, medical profession, such and such, I think it's best if he has a hard time sleeping at night. So maybe we should just swap, give him his medication at night and see what happens and be more experimental in seeing what works best for him. And we did that and we haven't looked back since, and that really helped him. But that took a lot of courage for my parents to say something, for me to say something and kind of say, hey, this isn't really what we wanted for him. We like him. We know who he is when he's not on this medication. And this is slowing him down. I think when you see differences in your family members, especially when they're going through medical procedures and all these different things, to pay close attention to that and to bring that up to medical professionals who are working with your family and say, hey, this doesn't seem right. I've advocated for him before in other instances where a doctor was like, oh, he doesn't need this procedure done. I was like, no, I want this procedure done. I think it's going to help him. And sure enough, when they did discover things that they should have seen, they should have noticed. And I think those are, I think any parent and any loved one would do that. But I think that in our culture, because we knew Buruk in his most authentic self, in his most loving self, learning the language, speaking the language, eating the food and the traditions and customs, when we saw a shift when we started to incorporate Western medicine into his life, that was it. And they were afraid because of the changes that would happen. They saw those changes, but then they were able to push back and say, this isn't working for us. Let's change that. And can you be flexible with us? Because we were really trying to do this for his benefit. And they were within the realm of possibility and the doctors were very supportive and helpful. But it took that step of faith, that step of bravery to say, hey, let's try this and see what happens. Hey, okay, that doesn't work. Maybe we should just change it and do it this way.
And I think that's because there's this fear of being labeled difficult, combative, that you're not medically trained, and the worries of speaking up and that it'll backfire. Someone will report you for not doing the right thing. What do you wish clinicians understood or medical professionals understood about what's happening inside the caregiver's body and mind when we have to make that leap of faith and be courageous in those instances?
That we're doing it with the pure intention of helping and supporting our loved one. And I think that it's very easy to look from a medical perspective, maybe it's easy to look at a caregiver a bit perplexed when we're saying, hey, we're challenging you because we don't think this is right. But the reality of it is because we know our loved one, we know how they are. And sometimes a medical professional only knows what's based on their practical experience, right? Not to negate their experience. But I think when it comes to healing, and there's an emotional and spiritual aspect to it, as well as a practical medical aspect to it. And that spiritual and that soul aspect to it is what the caregiver is the most familiar with. And that needs to be complemented with practical medicine as well.
You kind of need to take that holistic approach to care. It's not just one element. You've really got to look at every aspect of the person and how the new integration of medication or a new treatment plan is actually impacting not just their body, but their mental wellness, their physical wellness, spiritual wellness. And I think that gets missed a significant amount of the time, regardless of what culture you're from. They look at it compartmentalized. This is my field. I'm looking at their heart, but I'm not considering their renal function or their bowels or their mind or how it's kind of making them feel day to day. And I think that is, like you said, something that is missing, that needs to be communicated, because whilst they're the expert in their field, they're not the expert in our loved ones. They're not there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They're there for 15 minutes in an appointment. And yes, they're pulling on their clinical knowledge, but every person that they see is unique and individual. And sometimes I feel that they kind of get ingrained in this boxed theory that, no, this works, or you don't know what you're talking about, when in actual fact, here is the evidence, here is what we're seeing, here is the journey that we're on. And being able to have a rational, calm conversation about the impacts of the decisions that they are putting in place so that it isn't fragmented, because you're right, that is the journey when you're in anything to do with medical. Nobody talks to each other unless we as caregivers actively chase that down. And because we're talking about such at times inflamed topic when it comes to working with medical professionals as caregivers. Before we keep going, I just want to add a tiny pause for our listeners to just take a moment, take a deep breath, and just relax their shoulders and exhale, and remind yourself that you don't have to take it all in at once, and take what helps and leave the rest until you're ready to take it on, because it impacts us to see the results and how it kind of flows for our loved ones. And that is hard as a caregiver to watch the changes, to see what they were and how something is impacting them. So I just want to remind everybody that it's okay to breathe and just take a moment. And sometimes things are available right now and they're really helpful, but sometimes you're not ready for them, and that's okay. I want to talk about service systems because you have an extensive experience with housing, supports, and building a life outside of a home. When you were navigating the services, so housing, job coaching, community supports, what were the biggest gaps or surprises that you noticed?
So I think what I was not expecting was the wait list to get your loved one an adult care facility. I didn't realize there was lines, and every state is different. Every state, the waiting time, sometimes it's a year, sometimes it's 2 years, sometimes it's 3 to 5 years. I was not expecting that. That was very surprising to me. And I'm like, how do you even manage, how many adult homes are there? How many different care facilities are there? And a lot of the care facilities the caregivers are not always trained to support your loved one in their need. And so with my brother being on the spectrum, I did not know that. And some of these adult homes, they don't have individuals who specialize in autism. And you are that person that's going to be helping them and coaching them and teaching them what works and what doesn't until your loved one adapts. There are other opportunities where I think individuals can keep their loved one in their home. I wanted to do that, but again, I didn't have the bandwidth with my career, and I move every couple of years. It just wasn't possible for me to have him live in as much as I wanted it to. And that was a humbling experience. But finding a home for him, I was like, great, now we have 200 homes we got to sift through. So my girlfriends helped me. We called all 200 homes and we narrowed it down to 5. And he picked, I think as I mentioned before, he picked his adult home. And that was an interesting ride. Was not expecting how overwhelming it would be. And when you are interviewing these adult homes and the individuals that run these adult homes, you're asking them, hey, have you dealt with an individual, or have you not dealt? That's such a harsh word. I'm sorry. Have you ever had an individual in your care that is on the spectrum or has this disability or has dealt with this or who elopes and all these different things? And sometimes these caregivers don't. And if they know that your loved one, which I found out later, that if your loved one does elope, they won't take him. They won't take her. That's hard because you're like, I thought I could find a home for him. I thought I could find a home for her. Or they might not take your loved one for another reason that they don't have the capacity for. So it's a very complex process and a time-consuming process. And then you're so excited to find that home and have that door open for you, and you're super excited. And he had to adapt, and your loved one has to adapt. That part was really hard for him. He had a hard time adapting for the first 6 months. When he picked us home and we had decided that this is where he was going to stay, when I left, I had to come back to the DMV, back to the DC area. He said, wait, so you're leaving me too? And I just started to cry because he realized I was leaving. I was going back to DC and he was going to stay in Seattle. And this wasn't a fun trip anymore. This was a transition moment. And I was not expecting him to be as heartbroken as he was. It was a real emotion. I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize how attached we had gotten. And I cried like a baby on the plane. I cried on the way back and I was so sad. And I would call him every day and he was doing fine. And he was adapting to his roommates and trying to figure them out and trying to be friendly with them. And some of them were friendly, some of them were not so friendly. And he was trying to understand how to lean on these caregivers and how to trust them. It was so abrupt. Looking back, I wish I had maybe stayed a little bit longer, kind of like dropping off your child at daycare. Like the first day, it's like a shock to your child. It was very much like that for him. And I wish I had like maybe stayed half a day, maybe stayed a full day, then a half day, then a third of a day until he eased into that transition. But that's not the way that I had done things. And I guess I didn't think he would have such a hard time adapting. And he did. I would say for about 4 or 5 months. And then he was, okay, this is my home. And now he calls them all his roommates, his friends. He tells me stories about all of them. And so he's adapted, but it took a little bit of time. I wasn't expecting that. As far as I had to also, we were lucky. We have a great caseworker, and that was really awesome. But I think when it came to vocational support, I kind of went ahead of myself, and I apologize. I talked a little bit about this earlier, about the vocational and educational support. And so Buruk wants to have a job. He still wants to have a job. And I think I did not realize how difficult the process can be to find the right job for your loved one. And part of that fragmented aspect of these different support systems and services that are provided is that I had to put the educational piece together because I realized after he graduated from high school, not all colleges are actually suited to help members on the spectrum. And so I had to find a tutor that was willing to help Buruk with speech therapy and with developing some of the complex thoughts that he has and things he watches on TV, asks all these questions. I need somebody there to really help him with that because I knew that was going to help him vocationally and to get a job. So I had to put these two together and find, I'm still looking today for a really good speech therapist. So if anybody out there, I'm happy to listen. But trying to put them there together and just get that to work. And we're just now figuring that out. That was really important. As far as his social life too, he's a part of a program. It's like a big brother, big sister program where he goes out and for like 4 to 5 hours, he hangs out at the center. They go out and do events and with his friends, they all hang out together. That was something that I had to find for him too, because I realized, wait, what is he going to do every day if he's at the home? Like, who's going to take him? What services are provided? I had to find a community inclusion program, and there's a variety of them. So I had to find a volunteer opportunity on top of a job opportunity, on top of an educational opportunity. And then I had to hire somebody else that would take him to the YMCA to go to the gym. So finding all these different things to make his life full and happy. And I call him every weekend. And if he's doing well and he hasn't been causing any trouble, I'll buy him Burger King or McDonald's or whatever he wants because he likes junk food. We have junk food Fridays. And so we make sure that if he's doing well and he's been doing his assignments and been really good at the home and he's been respectful and he looks forward to it. And like a schedule is really important for somebody on the spectrum and having structure. So, okay, it's Friday. So those kinds of things, I realized I had to get him a calendar and making sure he had structure and he could check what day it is and what time it is. And he's like, when are you coming, Agazit? You're coming when? Are you coming around my birthday? Are we going to Hawaii? Where are we going next? It helps him with all of that. And so I had to realize I had to see what was out there, what would work with him, what wouldn't work with him. And there's just so many different opportunities in support, but you have to find the right one for your loved one. And our caseworker was really helpful with that. And I said, hey, what else is out there that is not expensive? What can I find scholarships? Can I find, because a lot of these things cost money. And there's always a fear of having your loved one just being a couch potato or a vegetable in the home that they're in. And you don't want that for them. And I'm not within proximity of my brother. So I really wanted to make sure I had these things in place for him. No, just because an organization doesn't have what you're looking for doesn't mean it's impossible. Maybe finding a way to find other programs and being a little bit flexible is really important. And I realized with one of the caregivers, he really has a great chemistry with that individual. So I was like, hey, I know you don't work on Saturdays, but do you want some extra hours and you want to hang out with him and do X, Y, and Z? And he's like, yeah, I love that. I really get Buruk. I really understand how much potential he has. That kind of chemistry is gold. And so finding that is super important and playing it by ear in that way. Now, if I were there, I would probably pick him up every weekend and take him out to do something. He'd have a more robust life. And I feel a sense of guilt not being there, but I think also this has also caused him to process some of his feelings of, okay, my sister isn't here. She's going to come on this time frame during this time. I'm going to talk to her on the weekend. So he's adapted to life not being perfect as well. And I think it's kind of a beautiful thing to watch where he is learning how to adapt to his environment, and he has adapted to his environment. And he'll call me when I talk to him. He'll be like, I'm happy, I'm good. But then I can tell if he's sad. I can see it in his eyes, what's going on, and just talk to him and have those conversations. And that's something that I want him to grow in, is that when he is feeling sad, he does have a therapist. therapist, but he is feeling sad about something. And I ask him how he's doing. I think he covers up a little bit. He'll say, I'm happy. Life is good. I'm happy. I'm good. I'm behaving. And I'm like, okay, I know what he's doing, but I know that there's a sadness behind his eyes and I want to get to the heart of that. And he's not ready to talk about it. And I wonder if he'll learn that in therapy. He's got some posters in his room that help with processing emotions, and he talks through it with the caregivers. But I think there's just this cultivation of maturity that's beginning to happen with him. And I think he's so sweet. He means well. He doesn't want me to be upset. He doesn't want to disappoint me. So he tells me he's always happy. But I'm like, okay, I know he means well, but I don't want him to feel like he can't have these conversations, be open about them. And he's learning that bit by bit. But I'm also trying to find other means where he can feel safe to talk about those feelings.
What I'm hearing is that life of thriving now is not just waking up for either of you and moving on through your day. Life is thriving is making sure that you have all of these elements lining up so that has this quality of life that would not be there if you weren't orchestrating, coordinating, connecting, and recognizing where services are not meeting him where he is, and still investigating and still doing all of these things. And I think that really demonstrates to anyone listening who's not a caregiver what caregiving is actually like. It's not what you see day to day. It's the micro moments of mental capacity, planning, coordinating, thinking about, okay, this doesn't seem to be working for my loved one. Where can we go now? How can I pivot? Where can I investigate? Who do I need to reach out to? Okay, this person is not working. What do we do? And all of these thousands of thoughts that happen outside of our day-to-day lives of our own when we're caring for someone else. I really appreciate you putting words to that and outlining what it is to have a thriving life when you're in a caregiving role. And what helped you keep having these uncomfortable conversations? Because it takes a toll on me when I have to be brave and not be confrontational, but just to have this voice for them in family, in community, and in systems without burning the bridges that we are pioneering when it comes to culture, when it comes to understanding of holistic care.
I think it's a two-way street. I think you as an individual have to be teachable and be willing to hear maybe what the support systems around you are not able to provide. And maybe you're missing something. I've done that. I've had conversations with our caseworker and some of the organizations that work with Biruk, and I'm like, hey, am I missing something here? I feel like he's not getting the support in this capacity. Is this normal? What's normal in your world? What's working? What's not working? Because I think this is not working. And I don't know why. I'm not sure what's going on. And I think just being like, hey, I don't know. I'm willing to learn. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But if I'm not wrong, let's rectify this and let's get that answer that's best for Biruk. Because at the end of the day, I think everybody that's in the Biruk's world, these different organizations, they have the same heartbeat, which is to take care of the loved one. It's always about the loved one. And I think all these institutions, organizations know that. And they have the same mission to make sure that your loved one is taken care of, is supported, has what they need to thrive. And they're coming from that place, and so are you. And I think that because of that in itself, it helps weave in the conversation in a productive manner, in a forward fashion. And I think that really does help. I've had conversations where I've called up organizations and I'm like, hey, man, this isn't working. Why is this happening? I need to know, and I want to understand, but I need to know why these needs aren't being met. And I'm very passionate about it because I love my brother, but they're like, actually, here, I don't know if you knew this, but our organization's going through a change. We're having new types of training coming in. Things have changed over the last couple of years, and understanding where they're coming from, and also be willing to ask yourself that question of, hey, okay, this organization is going through changes. Are these changes going to be good for my loved one? And if they're not, then find a different organization that's going to work for you. And I think really getting the heartbeat of what the organization's mission is that you're working with, whether it's to support him for vocational support or education or volunteer opportunities, are they able to really support him in the way that you need? And it's okay to pivot. It's okay to change. It's okay to find something that's different. I know there's one organization he works with that they've done a phenomenal job of helping him. And we're trying to find a job for him. And he's worked at grocery stores. He's volunteered at an animal shelter. And we're asking ourselves that question. And I think they were able to convey to me, and I loved it. His job coach said, there's these different jobs that we're looking at for your brother. for Biruk, but we need to find something that's very catered to him and how he understands and learns so we can get that day to day. Because there's this part of me that doesn't want to believe that he can find a job, but I'm also really nervous to see him go out there, and I don't want to see him fail. And they have reassured me time and time again, no, we've seen him. He's got a great resume. He's been doing X, Y, and Z. He's able to do these different things. We believe he can find a job, but we need to find this type of a job. And they worded it so well. They were like something that was very catered to him and specifically to him. We know what his strengths are. And I just didn't have the words to say that. But I knew that's what I was for, and they were able to put that to words for me. And I'm like, okay, I get it. And they're ensuring me that they'll be able to find something. So, okay, I can breathe a little bit. That is great. But I think it's a two-way street, honestly, of being teachable and then having those conversations where you are willing to make yourself a bit vulnerable and so people can see you frustrated and upset in certain conversations. And I think it's healthy because I think sometimes we care more about being polite and trying to be sweet and nice about certain things, but this is your loved one. I think when they see that, surely you're not the first person these organizations have dealt with where a parent or a sibling or a caregiver has expressed passion or frustration. You're not the first one. And so I think it's important for them to see that, not to scare them in any way, but that's how you build a bridge. That's when they know that you care and you can have those up and down conversations. That's you building a bridge. That's you being healthy and recognizing each other and recognizing how to work with each other. That's teamwork. It's okay for you to be frustrated. I've made phone calls on his behalf where I've been very frustrated and I've been very honest. And I don't want to say I'm proud of how I responded, but I'm glad that they saw that. And now I still keep in touch with these organizations, still work with them because they understand me and they understand my love for my brother. And it's not a deterrent. If anything, it's okay. We understand her and they can be honest with me and give me that healthy pushback and say, hey, we really are doing this for Biruk. We really are doing this to support him. And that's healthy. That's healthy for you to see each other in your truest form because at the end of the day, you're doing it for the purpose of supporting your loved one. So I think you shouldn't shy away from those conversations. I think you should be open and honest and willing to build that bridge and have those tough conversations, those uncomfortable conversations, because it'll only build a bridge. It'll only make things better for your loved one.
And I'm hearing that those conversations, that can take a toll on you as well when you're having to advocate, be fierce, but be respectful, be compassionate, but be enthusiastic about what you need. Was there a micro boundary that you had to learn that protected your well-being without making you feel like you were abandoning your brother in any way?
Yes. I think the micro boundary I would say is recognizing what's important in his life in the season that he's in and recognizing what isn't important in the season of his life. So there are certain phone calls and certain emails that I did not answer right away because they were not entirely a priority in his life in that season. But then there were others where I was like, I have to answer this now. I've got to really take this seriously. And so just compartmentalizing the things that mattered the most in his well-being and the things that didn't matter the most. I think it's a small step, but I think it definitely helps in recognizing where he is in his season of life. I knew that there were times where he was still grieving and he needed to just process the loss of his parents, but also the loss of a nucleus in a new environment. That was not the time to be looking for volunteer opportunities. That was a time for him to rest and to adapt. That was a time for him to feel safe in his new home. And that was a time for him to reflect. And as much as I wanted to do all these programs, I had to wait and I had to let him feel I needed to get a good sense that he felt at peace where he was at before I took the next step. And so really recognizing the season that your loved one is in and acknowledging how they process life as well.
And I'm really hearing that the micro boundary is giving yourself grace to not respond immediately, to give yourself bandwidth to address the immediate and come back when it's necessary to those other ones and not feel judgment or guilt around not doing it immediately, knowing that it's there and that if it is urgent on their behalf, they will come back to you again and then you can address it later. So I really like that micro boundary. It's not making a massive change. It's just giving yourself breathing space to be the best version of yourself. And if you could leave a caregiver with three things to remember if you could leave caregivers with three things to remember when they're bridging culture, disability support, and Western systems, what would you want them to hold on to?
I would say keep an open mind, communicate. Even if you think it's not something that's important, you would be surprised. Just communicate. So keeping an open mind, communicating, and willing to work as a team to come up with solutions that are super pivotal to your loved one.
I love all three of those. I think they kind of complement each other. through the entire process when we're looking at caring for somebody who is, they're not just one layer. There's all of these layers to each individual, their personality, the things that they need support with, how we interact with them for ourselves, and then how we'd like them to interact with the world around them. If you could give caregivers one sentence to carry into a hard room, especially when culture, grief, and responsibility collide, what would it be?
I would say you don't have to abandon yourself to be devoted to someone you care about, because your steadiness and your well-being matters just as much as the sacrifice you're making.
I think that's beautiful in recognizing that you matter too as part of the care plan when you're being a caregiver. And I'd really love to share again where people can find joyful resilience. Agazit, can you connect us to that for today's
Yeah, I
listeners?
can. Thank you for asking. So I have a website called agazitbooks.com, and you can purchase it through the website. You can also find it on amazon.com. You can find it on Barnes & Nobles, on Lulu Books, as well as Kobo. So all those platforms will have the book available in ebook form, as well as hardcover and paperback.
Fantastic. And I will include all of that information in the show notes of today's episode. Agazit, thank you so much. This conversation matters because so many caregivers are navigating two worlds at once, family expectations and complex systems, all while trying to protect dignity and keep going. Today, we've talked about inherited cultural scripts, what happens when Western systems don't understand your family, and what it can look like to honor your roots while still choosing the supports that help your loved one to truly thrive. If you're listening and you're carrying that tension, please hear this gently. You're not doing it wrong. You're building a bridge in a place that wasn't designed with in mind, really. Hey, lovely. Caregiver to caregiver, if today's episode supported you even in a small way, would you share it with another caregiver who's holding it together in hard rooms too? And if you have a quick moment, leaving a review on Apple Podcasts really helps this reach more caregivers who need calm days, clearer words, and practical support. I'll see you right back here next time for another episode. I'm Michelle, and this is a nervous system reset for caregivers. No pressure, no perfect routines, and no toxic positivity. Just one gentle reset and one practical next step. Until next time, take gentle care of your radiant moments and of yourself.